In tonight's news edition, in a keynote address to the United Nations General Assembly, His Majesty the King says the Middle East has to be a house of peace and prosperity through good governance and open doors to opportunity. UN chemical weapons inspectors are back in Syria as the issue dominates the UN General Assembly debate. And Iran's president reaches out to the West, and his country tomorrow holds talks with the big powers on its nuclear issue. Good evening and welcome to the news at 10. His Majesty the King said the international community must work together for a speedy resolution of the Middle East core issues. King Abdullah called on world leaders gathered at the UN General Assembly to help accelerate a political transition in Syria, noting the huge strains Syrian refugees placed on the kingdom's meager resources. Khaled Ababne has more in this report.
Addressing world leaders gathered for the United Nations 68th General Assembly, His Majesty the King said global security will long be shaped by what is happening now in the Middle East. He stressed that the region must be a house of peace and prosperity, with strong pillars of good governance and wide open doors to opportunity, especially for our young people. Jordan, His Majesty said, has been a historic model of coexistence and fraternity between Muslims and Christians.
Last month, Jordan hosted more than 100 eminent Muslim scholars from around the world. Their work affirms the true teachings of Islam and builds on Jordan's long-standing interfaith and interreligious initiatives. The Amman Message, A Common Word, and World Interfaith Harmony Week. The scholars said that there is no single prescribed model for an Islamic state, but they affirmed that the modern Islamic state should be a civic state, founded on institutions and with an inclusive constitution based on the rule of law, justice, and freedom of opinion and faith. The modern Islamic state should uphold equality across the ethnic and religious spectrum, and the scholars decisively condemned the incitement of ethnic and sectarian conflict, fitna. They recognized this evil for what it is, a threat to the Muslim world, Ummah, and indeed all humanity. Jordan has called upon the Organization of Islamic Cooperation to adopt these recommendations, which are critical guiding principles amid the turbulence and transformations across our region. This month, we in Jordan also convened an international meeting to address challenges to Arab Christian communities. They are an essential part of our region's past, present, and future. Jordan has been a historical model of coexistence and fraternity between Muslims and Christians. And we will continue to do our utmost to protect our Arab Christian communities and minorities. And we call on all countries to join us in our stand for diversity, tolerance, and mutual respect.
On Syria, the King said the Syrian crisis is a global humanitarian and security disaster. Escalating violence, he said, threatens to hollow out the rest of that country's economic and political future. He told world leaders that now is the time for accelerating a political transition in Syria to end violence and bloodshed.
My friends, the Syrian people must also have a future. And for that, the international community must act. It is time to fast-track a political transition in Syria, to end the violence and bloodshed, neutralize the threat of chemical weapons, restore security and stability, preserve the unity of Syria and its territorial integrity, and engage all its people in building their country's future. Syria's future will depend on the Syrian people, but the world has the duty, the interest, and the power to help, and help must be soon. The damage and dangers are mounting. The flow of Syrian refugees in Jordan already equals 1/10 of our own population. It could reach 1 million, some 20% of our population, by next year. These are not just numbers. They are people who need food, water, shelter, sanitation, electricity, healthcare, and more. Not even the strongest global economies can absorb this demand on infrastructure and resources, let alone a small economy and the fourth water-poorest country in the world.
Turning to the Palestinian-Israeli conflict, the king stressed that the international community must work to find a quick solution to the conflict, which remains the Middle East's core issue that fuels extremism in all parts of the world.
The talks that began in July show that progress can be made with willing parties, determined U.S. leadership, and a strong regional and international backing. We commend the President of Palestine and the Prime Minister of Israel for the bold decision to resume final status negotiations. We urge them to stay committed to reaching an agreement within the set time frame. Let there be no actions that can derail what is still a fragile process. And this means no continued settlement construction and no unilateral actions that threaten the status quo in East Jerusalem and its Muslim and Christian holy sites. Such threats would be a flashpoint for global concern. We know the right way forward, and the goal can be reached: a just and final two-state settlement based on international legitimacy and the Arab Peace Initiative. For Israel, real security and normal relations with 57 Arab and Muslim countries. For the Palestinian people, at long last, the rights they deserve in a viable and independent Palestinian state on Palestinian national soil based on the 1967 lines and with East Jerusalem as its capital.
On the sidelines of the General Assembly, King Abdullah discussed with UN Secretary General Ban Ki-moon the latest developments in the Middle East, particularly the repercussions of the Syrian crisis, as well as efforts to achieve peace in the region. His Majesty stressed the importance of the UN's role in backing efforts to reach solutions to challenges facing the Middle East and its peoples, particularly the Syrian crisis. During the meeting, attended by His Royal Highness Crown Prince Hussein, they also tackled efforts to support peacemaking between the Palestinians and the Israelis to achieve peace based on a two-state solution, which is a strategic Jordanian interest. At a meeting with Lebanese President Michel Suleiman, the king stressed international and Arab consensus to find a comprehensive political solution to the crisis in Syria. King Abdullah also discussed current regional issues with Tunisian President Monsef Marzouki, and the two leaders emphasized the importance of reaching a comprehensive political solution to the Syrian crisis and spurred the region more tension and violence. Syria was at the center of a meeting between King Abdullah and Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov. His Majesty commended recent US-Russian efforts regarding the chemical weapons issue to achieve a political solution. The meeting also dealt with efforts to achieve peace in the Middle East, referring to the important role played by Moscow and other members of the International Quartet in pushing peacemaking forward. Hala Dababne for the News at 10.
Also on the sidelines of the UN General Assembly, Foreign Minister Nasser Judeh met his counterparts from a number of countries. He discussed the situation in the Middle East with foreign ministers of Morocco, Turkey, Luxembourg, Kosovo, Comoros, and Finland. The ministers lauded Jordan's effort to help achieve peace and stability in the region. Judeh also met U.S. Special Envoy for Peace, Martin Indyk, who briefed him on the ongoing Palestinian-Israeli negotiations. Judeh stressed the importance of the resumption of negotiations leading to Palestinian statehood, which he said was a higher Jordanian interest. Indyk said Washington saw Jordan as a partner in the negotiating process. UN chemical weapons inspectors returned to Syria to continue investigating allegations of chemical weapons used in the country's conflict. Battles continue to rage around Syria while key powers forged a deal that aims to eliminate the chemical weapons, and Syria remains on the top discussion at the UN General Assembly. Farah Ajlouni has the update.
Syrian civilians seek refuge in a cave to escape the air bombardment by Syrian government jets. The Syrian military used aircraft in a battle for control of the town of Ariha in the Idlib province. Rebel soldiers say they are gaining ground in the area and that they have raided several government bases in the town. Abu Salim, an elderly Syrian who lived in Ariha, escaped to the cave in the mountain in order to protect his young children from the constant bombing.
We lost our homes. Look where we are living now, in a cave that is uninhabitable. We came and tried to clean it. There was water and dirt here. We came here because we are scared of these barrels that have no mercy on the young or the old. What can we do?
Other families packed their belongings in trucks to flee the town. Rebels are battling for control of Ariha, which sits along a key supply route for President Bashar al-Assad's forces. As the agony of civilians worsened by the day, UN inspectors are back in Damascus to investigate the use of chemical weapons. But their return seemed to be no deterrent to the fighting. Convoys of 5 UN cars arrived at the Damascus hotel a week after they confirmed that sarin gas was used in an August 21st attack. Assad's Western opponents said the inspector's report left little doubt that his forces were to blame for the attack. Syrian authorities denied the accusation. The Syrian issue was hotly debated on the first day of the UN General Assembly session. Western countries, including the United States and France, still saw military action as an option to solve the Syrian issue. But most developing countries are opposed to any military action without UN authorization. US President Barack Obama called for a resolution that will mandate consequences for Syria if the country fails to hand over its chemical weapons.
The United States of America is prepared to use all elements of our power, including military force, to secure our core interests in the region.
French President François Hollande said it was not enough to just condemn the violence. Diplomats say negotiations on a draft in New York have to come to a standstill, while Russia and the United States struggle to reach an agreement that would be acceptable to both. Farah Ajlouni for the News at 10.
Palestinian worshippers clashed with Israeli troops in occupied Jerusalem's Old City. The confrontations were triggered by attempts by Jewish extremists to storm Al-Aqsa Mosque compound in what has become a daily provocation against Arabs in the occupied city. Israeli police troops escorted ultra-Orthodox Jews and settlers to the Haram al-Sharif Mosque compound in Jerusalem's ancient walled city, sparking outrage from Palestinian worshippers. Palestinians have long rejected Jewish presence in Islam's third holiest site. Palestinians threw stones, bottles, and firecrackers at police officers who were escorting the settlers trying to force their way into the site on the eve of the Jewish holiday of Sukkot. Troops entered the compound and threw stun grenades to disperse the protesters. Palestinian women outside the compound gate scuffled with police as they tried to block young Jewish men from approaching the gate. The sacred site has been a flashpoint of tension in recent weeks. Similar clashes have taken place following provocative visits by Jews to the compound. U.S. Secretary of State John Kerry met Palestinian President Mahmoud Abbas on the fringes of the UN General Assembly in New York. Abbas earlier pledged to President Barack Obama that the Palestinians will exert every effort possible to try to ensure peace talks with Israel are a success. Obama is due to meet Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu next week in Washington as he tries to keep up the momentum in peace negotiations. Obama said no one is under any illusion that it would be easy. Abbas said negotiators will need to overcome several difficulties, but that the Palestinians are committed to the process. U.S. Ambassador to Jordan Stuart Jones lauded cooperation between his country and Jordan to support human development in the kingdom. The envoy underlined the importance of U.S.-Jordanian partnership in the field of human development and educational programs. Jones made the remark at the Talal Abu Ghazaleh Knowledge Forum, where he also observed how joint investment and efforts with Jordan have resulted in significant improvement in schools providing education to more than 250,000 students across the kingdom. The ambassador noted the collaboration with the King Abdullah II Development Fund to help aspiring Jordanian entrepreneurs through the Oasis 500 Boot Camp program. Iran tomorrow holds a meeting with the 5 permanent members of the UN Security Council and Germany. Iranian Foreign Minister Mohammad Jawad Zarif said he hoped the meeting will kickstart negotiations to resolve the dispute over Iran's nuclear program. In an address to the UN General Assembly, Iran's new president, Hassan Rouhani, expressed hope that U.S. President Barack Obama would not be swayed by what he called warmongering pressure groups at home in dealing with the Iranian nuclear dispute. Hibatum has more.
Iran's new president used his debut speech at the United Nations General Assembly to condemn international sanctions against his country. But Hassan Rouhani's speech lacked the strident anti-Western rhetoric of his predecessor. He offered no concessions but said Iran is willing to talk again about its nuclear program.
لذا جمهوری اسلامی ایران ضمن پافشاری بر اعمال حقوق خود.
In this context, the Islamic Republic of Iran, insisting on the implementation of its rights and the imperative of international respect and cooperation in this exercise, is prepared to engage immediately in time-bound and result-orientated talks to build mutual confidence and removal of mutual uncertainties with full transparency.
In his speech to the General Assembly, Obama said he is determined to test Rouhani's diplomatic gestures and challenged him to take concrete steps toward resolving the nuclear dispute. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu said Israel will not be fooled by Rouhani's international outreach and accused Tehran of stalling for time in order to develop nuclear arms.
What we heard from the Iranian president, unfortunately, was just an exercise in hypocrisy and in cynicism.
Netanyahu arrives in the United States next week on what aides describe as a mission to unmask Iran's new administration. The West sees Iran's new leadership a potentially promising partner for negotiations to stop what it fears is a drive to develop atomic weapons. Commenting on Rouhani's speech, China said dialogue and negotiation is the only correct way to resolve the Iranian nuclear issue. Iranian newspapers and residents in the capital Tehran reflected a mood of hope and optimism. Iranian newspapers focused on the new tone between Tehran and Washington, with headlines such as Obama says US respects Iran's right to nuclear energy, peace, hope, liberty, and with hope, peace is on hand. Hiba Al-Atoum for the News at 10.
The number of dead is rising after a powerful earthquake jolted southwest Pakistan. Hundreds of mud brick houses collapsed on residents throughout the remote and thinly populated area. The quake of magnitude 7.7 struck Baluchistan, a huge earthquake-prone province, and was felt across South Asia. We get more in this report.
By early evening local time on Wednesday, the number of dead in the Pakistan earthquake disaster had reached at least 327. The country's biggest quake since 2005 reduced hundreds of mud houses to rubble in Baluchistan province on Tuesday. The US Geological Survey put it at magnitude 7.8. Hundreds of people have been injured. The tolls of dead and injured were expected to rise as rescue teams moved deeper into the stricken area. The army sent troops to help with the relief operation. Trucks carrying medical supplies, doctors and paramedics left Karachi on Wednesday for the remote region. On the same day, residents in the worst-hit area, Awaran, started burying their dead. Pakistan TV station Dawn has shown images of what it says is a new island in the Arabian Sea thrown up by the force of the quake. The rare phenomenon brought residents out to see it for themselves.
Kenya has begun a forensic investigation into the weekend attack on a Nairobi shopping mall with the help of the United States, Britain and others. Bomb disposal experts and investigators searched through the wreckage of the mall after a 4-day attack by militants that killed at least 72 people. President Uhuru Kenyatta declared 3 days of mourning after troops defeated the Al-Qaeda-linked Al-Shabaab group that targeted the upscale shopping center popular with wealthy Kenyans and foreigners. The militants stormed the mall in a hail of gunfire and grenades on Saturday. The attack ended yesterday when Kenyan troops set off a series of explosions inside the building. The president said 5 militants and 6 security personnel were killed and 61 civilians had so far been confirmed dead. But an unknown number of corpses were buried under the masonry. Kenya's Interior Minister said the investigation was underway and that he expected only bodies of the attackers to be under the rubble.
I want to indicate that a number of our friends have joined our team, and specifically from the following countries: the US, Israel, Britain, Germany, Canada, and other agencies including Interpol. Terrorism is a global problem, and we welcome international intelligence sharing since it is consistent with the tackling of the problem.
Oracle Team USA won 2 more races against Emirates Team New Zealand to even the America's Cup's final series. The stunning roundabout by the U.S. boats continued on every front in perfect sailing conditions, with the U.S. team coming from behind to win the second race easily. New Zealand won the start for the first time in recent races, but then committed several tactical errors and Oracle stormed to a lead of nearly a minute. The final race is scheduled for Wednesday. Germany's Tony Martin crushed his rivals, including Olympic champion Bradley Wiggins, to clinch a 3rd consecutive time trial title at the Cycle World Championship in Italy. Brighton's Wiggins took the silver medal 46 seconds off the pace, with Swiss Fabien Castellera finishing 3rd 2 seconds further back. Former basketball star Shaquille O'Neal has become the newest minority owner of the Sacramento Kings. O'Neal now holds a minority stake of the Kings and was introduced as the newest of the basketball team's owners at a practice facility. O'Neal Jones, an ownership group led by tech developers and philanthropist Vivek Radhanav, which brought a 65% stake in the Kings in a deal valuing the team at $535 million. And finally, chilly tonight in most regions and mild in the Jordan Valley and Aqaba with northwesterly light winds. Tomorrow, a slight rise in temperatures expected. Therefore, it will be relatively hot and cloudy with northeasterly moderate winds. The Gulf of Aqaba should expect a warm night and hot tomorrow with northerly moderate winds turning brisk and slightly choppy seas. Next are the highs and lows for tonight and tomorrow. To end the news, here's a reminder of our top stories. In a keynote address to the United Nations General Assembly, His Majesty the King says the Middle East has to be a house of peace and prosperity through good governance and open doors to opportunity. UN chemical weapons inspectors are back in Syria as the issue dominates the UN General Assembly debate. And Iran's president reaches out to the West, and his country tomorrow holds talks with the big powers on its nuclear issue. With that, we come to the end of tonight's news. I'm Nancy Khair. Thank you for watching and have a good night.